I wasn't looking for anything. Not love. Not magic. Not the kind of feeling that changes everything. But maybe that's when it finds you, when you're standing still, watching the world pass you by, and someone walks in like a storm you didn't see coming. Her name was Emily Carson. And she had this laugh, like something you'd hear in a dream and forget the sound, but not the feeling it left behind. We met at a bookstore. That's not a metaphor. A real one, on 8th and Willow. I was flipping through a worn copy of The Great Gatsby when she reached over me to grab Jane Eyre. Our hands brushed. That was it. That single touch, accidental but electric. She smiled, said something about always chasing ghosts through fiction. I laughed, said I was just trying to understand why Gatsby kept chasing Daisy when she clearly wasn't worth it. She challenged me on that. Maybe it's not about her being worth it, she said, leaning on the shelf, eyes burning with some kind of stubborn fire. Maybe it's about how deep he was willing to feel. Even if it broke him. That line. God, I still remember it. That's who she was, someone who believed that depth mattered more than safety. That love should scare you a little. From there, it was fast. But not careless. We weren't reckless, we were certain. We'd walk through the park at midnight, holding hot coffee and talking about childhood wounds and future dreams. We'd slow dance in her tiny kitchen to vinyl records she inherited from her mom. We made plans, too many. Where we'd live. What color we'd paint the front door. Names for kids we didn't even know if we wanted yet. But it wasn't just the romance. It was the comfort. The rightness. Like we'd known each other long before we met. She saw through me in ways no one ever had. When I was quiet, she didn't fill the silence. She waited for what I wasn't saying. And when she looked at me, it was like she was looking into me. Not through me. Not past me. Into. There was this one night. It was raining hard, like cinematic, movie scene rain. We were soaked, running through the empty streets, her dress clinging to her, my shirt sticking to my skin. We ducked under the awning of a closed bakery, breathing hard, laughing like kids. She looked up at me, completely drenched, mascara running, and said, "I never believed in forever. Not until you." I kissed her. And in that moment, I swear to God, I knew, this is it. My life was no longer mine alone. It was hers too. I don't know the exact moment the world started to shift. When love started to turn into something harder, heavier. But for a while, maybe the best while of my life, it was pure. Simple. True. We had our fights. Our stubborn moments. But they never lasted. She had this way of pulling me back into the light before I got lost in my own head. And I loved her more than I thought was humanly possible. If I'd known then what was coming. If I'd seen the signs earlier. Would I have pulled away to protect myself? No. I would have held her tighter. Because some people. They're not just part of your story. They are the story. It started small. The kind of things you brush off. Emily would forget where she left her keys, twice in one day. Or she'd lose her train of thought mid-sentence and laugh it off, calling it brain fog. At first, I did too. Life was busy. She was working long hours at the gallery, barely sleeping. We were both stretched thin, so it felt normal. But then there was the morning she stood in the kitchen, holding a carton of milk, just staring at it. Not moving. Not speaking. just locked in place like time had stopped for her. I said gently, touching her arm. She blinked, looked at me like I'd pulled her out of somewhere far away. Sorry. Zoned out. But I knew it was more than that. Her energy shifted. She was quieter, distant. Not cold, not angry, just fading. That's the only word I can use. Like the colors in her were draining. Like the fire that made her who she was flickering out in slow motion. I tried to talk to her. You okay? Just tired. You're not yourself lately. Everyone has off days. But the days piled up. 1 became 10. 10 became 30. There were nights when I'd wake up and find her sitting by the window, legs pulled to her chest, staring out into nothing. I'd wrap my arms around her and she'd lean into me, but she didn't say a word. I hated how helpless I felt. We went to doctors. Specialists. Ran tests. Blood work. Scans. Weeks of waiting. I told myself not to spiral, but I'd already started falling. Then came the results. A rare neurological condition. Progressive. No cure. Something about her brain's signals getting lost, like static on a wire. Something about time, not much of it. Something about how it would change her, piece by piece. I sat in that sterile white room as they said those words, and I remember gripping her hand so tightly, like if I held on hard enough, I could keep her here. But she didn't cry. She just nodded. Later, in the car, she looked over at me. You don't have to stay, she said softly. This isn't the life you signed up for. I almost screamed. Instead, I pulled the car over, turned to her, and said, Don't ever say that again. You're not a burden. You're my whole damn life. And I meant it. But love doesn't stop pain. It doesn't fix broken neurons or make brain cells grow back. Love doesn't hold up against science, not always. The days grew stranger. She forgot my name once. Just for a moment. She caught herself immediately and laughed like it was nothing, but I felt that moment like a knife. Another time, she walked out the front door without shoes, halfway down the block before I caught her. She didn't remember where she was going. And then one night, she looked at me from across the room and said, You're beautiful, but I don't remember how I know you. That's when I broke. I held her, sobbing, her head on my chest. She cried too, but more for me than herself. That was Emily. Always loving, even while she was slipping away. I stopped working. I stayed home. I learned her medications, her routines. I made charts, reminders, alarms. I watched her fade like someone fading from a photograph, but I refused to let her go. But I was losing her. And no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't stop it. And then came the moment that still lives in my bones. It was a cold Tuesday morning. I woke up and her side of the bed was empty. At first I thought maybe she was in the kitchen. Or in the bathroom. But she was gone. The door was unlocked. Her slippers were still by the bed. Emily had disappeared. The police called it a nonviolent missing person case. They told me not to panic. She's probably nearby. These things happen. These things happen. How do you explain to someone that the person you love has been vanishing long before she physically disappeared? For the first 48 hours, I didn't sleep. Didn't eat. I called every hospital, every shelter, checked every camera I could get access to. I handed out flyers like it was oxygen keeping me alive. A picture of Emily smiling, unaware that someday that photo would become a search warrant for the woman who used to be everything. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Each morning, I'd wake up hoping I'd dreamed the whole thing. That I'd roll over and see her there, her messy hair, her eyes blinking at the light, her warm voice saying, "I had the weirdest dream." But the bed stayed cold. I became a shadow. People stopped calling. Friends who meant well couldn't keep up with my silence. I didn't blame them. I wasn't myself anymore. I was something else, haunted, hollow, chasing a ghost in broad daylight. I stopped shaving. I stopped caring. Some nights, I walked through the streets until sunrise, praying I'd spot her in the blur of headlights or hear her voice in the breeze. It sounds crazy, I felt her. Like she was near. Like some thread still connected us, even if I couldn't see it anymore. I kept her things exactly the same. The chipped mug she loved. Her jacket hanging by the door. Her bookmarks left in half-read novels. I couldn't touch them. To move anything felt like admitting she wasn't coming back. Sometimes, I'd sit on the floor of her closet just to breathe her in. I know how that sounds. I know grief makes people do strange things. But when someone is your world, losing them isn't like losing a person, it's like losing color, gravity, meaning. And then came the guilt. The questions. What if I missed a sign? What if I locked the door that night? What if I hadn't let her sleep on the side of the bed closest to the window? I started seeing her in strangers. I'd be on the bus and swear I saw her reflection in the glass. Or hear a laugh that sounded like hers and my heart would break all over again. I screamed into my pillow until I was hoarse. I begged God, the sky, the silence to bring her back. But nothing answered. Still, I didn't give up. Because love doesn't vanish just because someone does. It lingers. It changes you. It becomes your fuel when the world burns around you. One night, I sat in the dark, holding her scarf in my hands, when I realized, I couldn't keep living like this. Being a ghost. A memory wrapped in skin. I had to find her. No matter what it took. And in that moment, something inside me snapped into place. Not in anger. Not in rage. In resolve. I stood up, wiped my face, and pulled out the journal she used to write in. I flipped through the pages, looking for something, anything, she might have left behind. And then I found it. A note. Scribbled in the margins. Almost hidden. If I ever forget who I am, follow the paintings. It was nothing. And it was everything. Because Emily didn't just paint for galleries. She painted secrets. She used to say, the canvas always knows more than the artist. It remembers things we forget. And suddenly, I remembered something, an unfinished painting in her studio. One she'd been working on secretly. She never let me see it. I rushed there in the middle of the night. Broke in through the back door. And there it was. A city skyline. But not our city. A small coffee shop tucked in the corner of the frame. A red awning. A crooked sign. And in the corner of the canvas, barely visible, a train station name. Somewhere I'd never been. But I would go. Because she was out there. Somewhere. Waiting. Or lost. And I would find her. Even if I had to walk through fire. Even if I had to become someone else. I took a leave of absence from everything, my job, my life, even my name, in a way. The man I used to be didn't have room for what I was about to become. I packed a duffel bag, left a note for the landlord, and boarded the first train headed toward that name on the painting, Harper Station, a tiny town I'd never heard of, 2 states away. The ride was quiet. Long. I stared out the window for hours, gripping the corner of that painting I'd cut from the canvas and folded into my pocket. I didn't know what I expected to find. A miracle? A clue? A sign? But what I found was everything. The coffee shop from the painting was real. Same crooked sign. Same red awning. It was called Millie's Brew, and it sat on a corner in downtown Harper like it had been waiting for me. I walked in slowly, heart pounding. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and ink. Wooden tables. Jazz playing low. And on the far wall, her painting. Not a copy. The original. Framed, signed, E. Carson. I couldn't breathe. The barista noticed me staring. A woman in her 60s, gray curls tied back, eyes like she'd seen everything and still chose kindness. You okay, hon? I pointed to the painting. Do you know who made that? She squinted, then smiled. Of course. That's Emily. She used to come in here every Wednesday, sit by the window, paint for hours. Sweet girl. Quiet. Fragile. My heart felt like it split down the middle. When was the last time you saw her? She hesitated. Couple weeks ago. Maybe 3. Came in shaking, like she was scared of her own shadow. Left a sketchbook behind. A sketchbook. She handed it to me like it was a sacred artifact. And in it, page after page, were images of places I didn't recognize. Train stations, alleyways, apartment numbers. And scribbled between them, like breadcrumbs from a mine trying to stay above water, were messages. If they find me, I forget. He knows my name but I don't trust his eyes. Find Thomas. Trust nobody wearing blue shoes. That last one might sound ridiculous. But when your mind is unraveling, reality warps. Details become lifelines. Her world had become a labyrinth of fear, and someone was chasing her inside it. I photocopied every page, mapped out every drawing, every landmark. Then I found him. Thomas Rivera. An art dealer Emily had worked with before her diagnosis. He lived 2 towns over. I made some calls. Lied my way into a meeting. Told him I was an investor interested in Emily Carson's work. The moment I walked into his gallery, my skin crawled. He greeted me like we were old friends. Slick smile. Too charming. Too rehearsed. She was gifted, he said, offering me a drink I didn't touch. Tragic, what happened to her? What did happen? I asked. He gave a half smirk. She got lost in her own head. I pushed. And where is she now? She checked herself into a care facility. That's all I know. But his eyes twitched when he said it. And I'd seen those eyes before, in one of the drawings. The sketchbook. Page 27. A man with a ring shaped like an eagle's talon. Thomas was wearing it. That's when I knew. He hadn't just known Emily. He'd been controlling her. I left quietly. Didn't make a scene. But I followed him that night. He drove 2 hours into the woods, to a private building with no sign, no lights, no welcome. I parked down the road, heart racing, and walked up on foot. A locked facility. Fenced. Barbed. No visitors. But I saw her. In a second-floor window. Briefly. Just a silhouette. Fragile. Thin. But her. Emily. And then she was gone again. The next morning, I went full warpath. I researched the building. Found out it was owned by a private medical trust connected to Thomas Rivera. And not just that, he had a history. Quiet lawsuits. Families silenced with NDAs. Women treated for conditions they didn't understand. Art used as collateral. He wasn't a dealer. He was a predator. He found vulnerable artists, especially women like Emily, and signed them into lifetime care for a percentage of their future work. Their pain, his profit. I took what I found to a lawyer. And a journalist I knew from college. We moved fast, expose, pressure, a legal order for visitation. 1 week later, I walked back into that facility. Escorted. Watched. But I didn't care. Emily was sitting in a chair, staring at the wall. But she looked up when I walked in. And for one terrifying moment, there was nothing. Just blank eyes. A flicker of confusion. But then. A tremble. A tear. A whisper. You followed the paintings. I broke. Right there. Fell to my knees. Took her hand. I told you I'd find you, I whispered. I'll always find you. The reunion wasn't how I imagined it. There was no movie score moment, no running into arms, no kiss that fixed everything. Emily's hand in mine felt thin. Cold. Like paper that had been folded too many times. Her eyes flickered with recognition, but only for seconds at a time. The rest of the visit, she seemed to float somewhere between memory and shadow. Still, she had remembered me. Even once. That was enough. At first. I moved to Harper. Rented a tiny apartment just 3 miles from the care facility. It wasn't much, peeling paint, 1 lamp, 1 chair. But I didn't care. Every day, I visited her. Even when she didn't speak. Even when she looked right through me. And slowly, very slowly, pieces of her began to return. She started asking questions. Did we know each other once? I'd answer, you loved me. And she'd smile like she almost believed it. I brought her sketchbooks. Paints. Old music. Things that had once meant something. At times, she would laugh, short, broken laughs, and say things like, my mind is full of dust. Or, I don't know what's real anymore. Each time she said that, it killed me. But I smiled anyway. I had to. Because I'd made a decision. I was going to save her. Even if I had to become someone I didn't recognize. I began to change. At first, it was subtle. I stopped answering calls from my old life. Let people assume I'd moved on. In truth, I had, just not in the way they thought. Then it got deeper. I started pulling favors. Contacting underground medical researchers. Paying in cash for second opinions. I even bribed a night nurse for records the facility refused to release. I learned the language of pharmaceuticals, the neurological terms, the slow poison of what had been done to her. And yes, I confronted Thomas. One night, I followed him again. Waited until he stepped into the alley behind his gallery, alone. No cameras. Just us. Did you think I'd stop looking? I said. He smiled like a villain from a book. You've got heart. I'll give you that. I didn't hit him. But I could have. I wanted to. Instead, I leaned in and whispered, one more move, and I swear to God, I'll bury your entire empire. I've got enough to ruin you. I saw something flash in his eyes, fear. He backed off after that. But I knew it wasn't over. Meanwhile, Emily kept drifting in and out. Some days she was lucid enough to paint. Other days, she cried in silence for reasons she couldn't name. It tore me apart. Until one night, I cracked. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall, fingers trembling. I'd just come back from the facility where she didn't recognize me at all. Not even a flicker. I looked in the mirror, and I didn't see me anymore. My hair was longer. Eyes darker. There were creases in my face I didn't remember having. I was someone else now. Someone colder. Sharper. Built from heartbreak and obsession. From devotion that had turned into something dangerous. But this version of me was strong. This version of me didn't take no hope for an answer. I tracked down a doctor in Montreal who specialized in rare neurological recovery programs. Experimental stuff. Risky. Expensive. But with potential. I sold everything I had. Cashed out my retirement. I didn't care. None of that mattered if Emily never came back to herself. I filed for medical proxy rights. Fought the system. Threatened lawsuits. They pushed back, hard, but I had documentation, evidence, a journalist friend still watching everything. In the end, they gave in. I transferred Emily out of that awful place. We moved to Montreal together, her in a private room, me in the apartment next door. I met with the medical team every day. Adjusted her schedule. Learned her treatments. Sat beside her as she trembled through the detox, the brain stimulation, the experimental therapy. It was hell. But I stayed. Because I wasn't doing this for the woman she used to be, I was doing it for her, as she was now. Fractured. Fading. Fighting. She was still in there. I believed that with everything in me. And one morning, weeks after the transfer, she opened her eyes, looked at me for a long time, and whispered. Did we dance in the rain once? I dropped to my knees, tears pouring down my face. Yes, I said. You wore that green dress. You said you never believed in forever until me. She smiled. Small. Tired. But real. That sounds like something I'd say, she whispered. That was the first moment I let myself hope again. But I knew then, I was no longer the man she fell in love with. I'd become something else. Someone shaped by loss, sharpened by grief, remade by relentless love. It had cost me everything. But if I had to do it all again, I would. Time moved differently after Montreal. Some days, it felt like we were stealing seconds from a life that had already ended. Other days, it felt like we were starting over, new names, new eyes, trying to build something out of the ashes. Emily had good days. Bad ones too. But she was getting better. Not cured, that was never promised. But aware. Present. There were moments when her eyes lit up again, when she told jokes, danced in the kitchen, hummed to old records like nothing had ever been lost. I lived for those moments. One morning, we sat on a bench near the hospital, warm coffee in our hands, scarves around our necks, watching the world carry on like it always had. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I know who you are." I turned to her slowly, heart stopping. "You're the man who stayed," she said. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Tears welled up in her eyes. "You loved me when I didn't even know myself." "I still do," I whispered. "Always." But healing isn't linear. There were days when she woke up screaming. Days when she didn't know what year it was. When she looked at me and asked, "Is this real? Or is this one of the dreams?" And the hardest part? She started realizing what had happened to her. What she'd lost. "I missed seasons," she told me once, her voice breaking. "Whole seasons of you." She'd cry in the middle of conversations. I held her through it all. But something shifted. She began asking questions, deep, existential ones. Why me? Why did I come back and others don't? Why did you ruin yourself just to hold on to someone slipping away? I never had good answers. Just love. But love wasn't enough to stop what was coming. One evening, the doctor sat me down. "There's been progress," he said. "But there's also something we didn't catch early on." The scans showed a degenerative pattern. Slower than before, but still present. A silent countdown. "She has months. Maybe a year, if we're lucky." I nodded. Didn't cry. I'd cried all my tears already. The next morning, I didn't tell her. Instead, I made pancakes. We watched old movies. I played the guitar for her, even though I only knew 3 chords. She smiled through it all. Maybe she knew. Maybe she just didn't want to ruin the moment either. In her final months, we traveled. Just local places, the sea, the forests, a cabin up north where the stars were so clear it felt like we were floating. She painted again. Not for galleries. Not for legacy. Just for us. Our last night together, we danced in the living room of that cabin. No music. Just the sound of the fire crackling and our feet brushing against old wood. She looked up at me with glassy eyes and said, "You didn't save me, but you gave me time. And love. And I think that's even more." I held her tight. "You brought me back to life," I whispered. She leaned in. "Even if we don't get forever, I'd choose this short story again. Every time." Emily passed away 2 weeks later. In her sleep. Peacefully. My hand in hers. I still live in that cabin. I keep her last painting above the fireplace, a field of golden light, 1 tree, 2 silhouettes holding hands. People ask me why I never moved on. Why I stayed here. Alone. But I'm not alone. She's in every corner of this place. Every brush of wind, every quiet morning, every page of the journal she left behind. I changed for her. I bled for her. I lost parts of myself I'll never get back. But I also became someone better. Not whole. But honest. Because now I understand something most people don't. Love and pain are not opposites. They are the same thing. The deeper you love, the more it hurts. And the more it hurts, the more real it was. So if you've ever loved someone and lost them, whether to time, or illness, or circumstance, don't run from the pain. It means it mattered. And that kind of love, it stays. Always.